We have a lot to cover today. Jacob, you canceled the annual convention again. Probably a wise decision. And you're going to tell us about the website. So
Sure.
why don't you come on in?
Yeah, no, it's unfortunate that we won't be able to gather in Baltimore this year, but you know, in the interest of health and safety, we aren't able to really plan things out right now. So we had to push it back a little bit, but hopefully that means once we do get to gather in Baltimore for the 50th annual convention, should be a pretty fun party. So I think we'll be itching and ready to go, you know, getting together in person again, hopefully soon. And, you know, hopefully all the local chapters can start meeting in person later this spring or this summer. You know, we'll see. We'll see how things go with vaccinations around the country, and hopefully it'll be a lot safer this summer than last summer to get together in person. But in the meantime, we get to meet virtually, which has been really a lot of fun, I think, being able to participate and to attend a lot of Saber events that maybe you don't otherwise have a chance to. So this is, it's been great for a lot of people. We've had a lot of positive feedback on it. I've certainly participated in a few and attended a lot more. So hopefully this is something we can continue doing even when we are able to meet in person. So today I'm here to talk a little bit about the Saber website. I want to give a little bit of an overview because for a lot of you that have been members for a long time, you've seen a couple different iterations. This is now the third one that I've been working on since I started working for Saber back in 2011. We relaunched the Saber.org website last summer, and we're using the WordPress system now, and it's really a lot of fun new tools and a lot of fun new features on the website that you can find, you know, with a lot of different baseball research tools to help you do your own articles and your own research, and also kind of the final products of that, all the articles that Saber has published over the last 50 years are going to be online very soon. Many of them are already online. We've got over 5,000 biographies from the Bio Project. We've got more than 2,500 game stories from the Games Project. We've also got thousands of articles from the Baseball Research Journal and the National Pastime already online, and we're adding more and more every single week. I've got a great group of interns this spring from colleges around the country who are helping us get more of these articles from Saber's research collection online. So I wanted to share my screen here and give you a little bit of a quick tour. I'm only going to talk for about 20 minutes, so we're not going to be able to go over everything here, but I want to show you around the Saber website. And if you haven't been on the Saber website for a while, or if you just want a little bit of a refresher, hopefully you'll learn some things about you know, what you can find at saber.org. So let me share my screen here real quick. All right, can everybody see the top of the Saber website right now? Seeing some nodding heads, so hopefully that's a yes. All right, so this is the brand new Saber website. We relaunched this in the summer of 2020. And again, we're using the WordPress system, which allows us to do a lot of fun, cool little features at saber.org that we haven't always been able to do, publish things through the web, and especially all the publications projects, all the research committees that are working on some cool stuff. We're able to present them and display them in some fun new ways. Some of you may have seen our Saber 50 at 50 web project over the last few months. We've got a new one coming out in a couple of weeks on baseball books. And so that's, you know, one of the many fun things. We've got a couple web projects that are in the works now that are a lot more expansive than that. And this website is allowing us to really showcase a lot of the cool research that all Saber members are doing. And so that's something that we're very excited about for the future. And so I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of what we have here, because there's more than 65,000 pages on the Saber website now. So even I, who work on this website every day, don't know everything that's here sometimes because there's so much. And so it's easy to get lost. It's easy to not be able to find your way back out because there's so much here. But I want to call your attention to a couple different areas that I think you'll find interesting, and you'll be able to find some interesting articles and stories about baseball that are, hopefully relevant to your interest, or, help you find out something that you didn't even know. And the big thing I want to talk about today is the research collection. And this is basically a combination of almost everything that Sabre members have done over the last 50 years. And we're going to be adding more and more to this over the next coming months and really into the future. And the research collection, again, is just kind of a collection of everything that Sabre has done since we were formed in 1971. I'm going to open this up here real quick. And this is kind of where we're putting all the cool baseball stories, from the Baseball Research Journal to the National Pastime, and to the Bio Project, the Games Project, pretty much everything, all the baseball research that Sabre has done, we're putting it inside the research collection, so you can find it all in one place. We've also got the oral history collection, where we've got about 500 or 700 interviews, audio recordings over the last 50 years with baseball figures. That is now on the Sabre website. Later this year, we're going to be adding research presentations, the recordings from the last 10 or 12 years, which is all we've got, but last 10 or 12 years of the Sabre convention and the Sabre Analytics Conference, we've got recordings of research presentations. So later this year, we'll be adding that to the Sabre website. I think we've got about 350 recordings of presentations, and so you'll be able to find those and listen to those presentations again. So again, we're trying to just add more and more, all the different ways that Sabre members have published their research. We're trying to get it all online so that it's more accessible to people, because that's really the whole mission of Sabre, is to make baseball research accessible, and help people learn and understand the game a little bit better. So I wanted to kind of just go over a few areas of this research collection, so you could see, what all is in it, and just give you a little bit of an update. I gave a presentation last month to the Sacramento and the Bay Area chapters, and that is now on YouTube, and you can actually go watch it on YouTube, and talking a little bit more about the collection and talking about specifically the research resources that Sabre members have access to. And you can actually find this at the very bottom of the research collection page on the left side here, the research resources. So I don't want to go over that again. You can watch that on YouTube, and I'll put that in the chat here today so that you can take a look at that presentation that I gave last month. So I don't want to go over that one again, so you can watch that. But I just wanted to call your attention to it so you know where to find it, because research resources is really one of the best member benefits that we offer to anyone who signs up to become a Sabre member. So I want you to hopefully check that out and see what all is there, because a lot of really cool stuff that you can find in the resources section. We also offer a how to do baseball research guide. So if you're just getting started in baseball research, or if you just want some tips on how to conduct research a little bit more effectively or efficiently, or just you don't even know where to start, this is a great how-to guide that Sabre published back in, I think, 1987, and we've updated it over the years to take advantage of new tools on the internet and everything else. So that's another tool that we offer to Sabre members to learn more about how to do the research. But up here in the research collection, this is kind of the final product, what we've got here. And so I just wanted to kind of go through a few of these so that you can see what we've got and, show you around the Sabre website. We'll start here with the biography project. A lot of you know this is probably Sabre's most visible project. It's certainly the most ambitious project Sabre's got, trying to write a biography of every single person who ever played in the major leagues, along with figures off the field as well. We've got executives, we've got umpires, we've got scouts, you name it. We've got a biography of just about anybody right now. We're trying to write one of everyone who played in the major leagues. We'll be adding, we've been working with seamheads.com to add all the Negro Leagues players in their database to our biography project. So all of them will be available to write about as well. So this is, again, just one of the best projects, most collaborative projects that Sabre's ever done. And in the biography project, you can find, again, bios for just about anybody. We're publishing new ones every single week. We just did one of Jim Lefevre, the Dodgers player and Mariners manager, Cubs manager in the 1980s. Bob Watson, the Astros All-Star and the Yankees GM. We've got a new one of him, and then we're working back through our some of our books. The 1995 Braves book that was done last year. We're adding those bios as well. So new bios are being posted all the time, and this is a great place to find them all in the bio project. You can also click through and read some random bios, learn about some players that you don't know about. And on the bio project, you can also go through these categories and find players who have 300 wins as a pitcher or who 500 home runs as a hitter. And you can find all their bios on one page as well. So this is something not a whole lot of people know about that you can kind of browse through. We've got a page for Hall of Famers. Click through here. You can find just about everybody. I think we're missing about maybe 15 or 20 now out of all the 300 or so Hall of Fame inductees. But just about everybody else is in here, and you can go through and scroll through and read their bios as well. So this is just, again, just a cool way to present all the interesting biographies that Sabre members have written. We've also got all of our book projects through the Sabre Digital Library. We've got pages for each of these teams. So I did a book a few years ago with our Black Sox committee for the 1919 Chicago White Sox, and you can go to the page and read all their bios in one place. So this is, again, something, if you haven't browsed through the Sabre website, this is an interesting way to find out about players and people that you might not know about. We've also got pages for the All-American Girls League. We've got a page for the Major League Team Ownership Histories, which is kind of an offshoot of the bio project. You can find out about, the whole history of off the field, the Dodgers and the Mets and the Diamondbacks, and you name it. We've got histories of their team ownerships and how those team change, or how those franchises have kind of evolved over the years behind the scenes. So that's another great way to kind of explore the bio project here. And then through the demographic category here, we've got all kinds of different areas where you can learn about executives, learn about people who were famous outside baseball. Maybe they played in the NFL, maybe they were politicians or something like that. And so you've got all kinds of interesting ways to explore the 5,000 biographies that we've published over the years. So that's kind of a little bit of an overview on the bio project. The games project is very, very similar. We've also got a lot of different ways to search for new games and new stories that are being written. You can find stories about all the no-hitters that we've published, all the all-star games, our first games back project from last year, all about memorable returns to play, including opening day from last year with the pandemic season and the delayed start to the year in July. So we've got that project that just went up last year. And again, just all kinds of interesting game stories that hopefully you'll learn something new as you explore through it. We've got over 2,500 game stories and more published every single week. So moving over to the Baseball Research Journal, this is something I'm very, very excited about. All of our baseball research journals are online in some capacity now, from the first one in 1972 all the way to the most recent one this past fall, with Josh Gibson on the cover. Pretty cool little illustration there from Gary Sieradzkowski, the Sabre member in Cincinnati. So you can read all the Baseball Research Journal articles online, or download the PDF edition as well. And you can go through to the Baseball Research Journal archives page. And this is something we have been working on quite a bit in recent months, adding all the old articles to the website. We're not quite there yet. We're about 60% of the way. We've got all the BRJs online from the 1970s and 80s, and then from the past decade. But we're still working on the 1990s and the 2000s decades to get all these articles online so that you can search for them and find them and share them more easily. You can see here, you can scroll through and click on all the recent baseball research journals. and you can read every article from those journals online on the Sabre website. So that's something we've been working on a lot and adding to the website over the past year or so. And you'll see there's a little bit of a gap here between 2009 and 1989. We're still adding the 1990s and the 2000s. So as soon as that is completed, we'll be adding those here as well. But it's pretty cool to be able to go back and read from some early Sabre members and some early baseball research journals and see what's out there. Because a lot of interesting articles. I was reading one from either 1972 or 73. They were searching for old Negro Leagues players who were still around and, what they were up to. And a lot of these players, you've probably heard of the Buck Leonards of the world and Judy Johnson and Cool Papa Bell. They were all still around and still working. And there were Sabre members in the 1970s who were, out there searching for them, trying to find out what had happened to them so that they could, hopefully interview them and learn their stories. That was something that Sabre was working on very, very early before a lot of other people. If you scroll down past the online articles, you can click through and download all the PDFs for the Baseball Research Journal going back to the mid-1980s. So that's another way to explore the Baseball Research Journal. And then you can also purchase the print edition online if you want some extra copies to add to your own collection. But again, this is just a really cool way to explore what Sabre members have done. I'll click through here on one of the early baseball research journals so you can see some of these names may or may not be familiar to you, but a lot of early Sabre members, some of the founding members, including Bob Davids and Bob McConnell. So a lot of really interesting, groundbreaking research, especially at the time, because back in the 1970s when Sabre was first forming, there weren't a whole lot of places to publish this type of research. That was one of the reasons Sabre was formed, was to have an outlet and to be able to, disseminate all of this research that members were interested in doing. And so it's really evolved a lot in the last 50 years. But that was the whole purpose, was to have a way to publish some of this research. And now, we're publishing probably, 10 or 20 times as much research as we were in 1973. In 1973, this was basically this was it. You had the Baseball Research Journal, and that was about it. And so now we've got a lot of different ways. We were publishing books just about every month. We did a new one on Negro Leagues research earlier this month called From Rube to Robinson. And so again, you can go through now and you can read all these old articles and see, what some of these people were working on. And so it's really cool to be able to go through and read, somebody like Pete Palmer writing in 1973. Pete's still around. Pete's still doing sabermetric research today. In 1973, he was writing about on-base percentage, a stat that barely anyone had ever heard of at that point. So this was a really groundbreaking article, and he continued to do a lot of great research over the years. And one of the cool things I'll show you here on the Sabre website, we've got author pages for everybody whose articles are on the site. And you can go through and find out a little bit more about them and, read a lot of the articles that they've done. And so Pete has written, again, since 1973, Pete's been writing Sabre Journal articles. And so a lot of these are already up and we'll be adding more in the future from the 1990s and the 2000s. But a lot of the articles are already here. And so you can go to anyone's author page and find out, more about what they've done. And actually, I want to highlight a little bit in the author page so you can see a little bit more about what is in the research collection. And if you search for an author, and I'll use Mark Armour, our board president, as an example, you can use the advanced search on the Sabre website to search for anyone's author page here. And again, this is something we're going to be growing a lot in the coming months, adding research presentations, adding some oral history interviews, if you've ever worked with the oral history committee. And so this is a cool way that we're going to put it all in one place so that, you can share this with your friends and family, all the interesting research that's been done. So if you look at some of the author pages for people like Mark Armour, who's very prolific in the research, you can see all the biographies that he has written for the Bio Project. You can read the Games Project stories. You can read a lot of the journal articles from our various research journals, some of the team ownership histories that he has co-authored, and other research articles as well. He hasn't written any ballparks for the ballparks project, but a lot of different stuff. And so, you know, the more that you do, the more that you publish through Saber, the more that we're going to put this out there so that, you know, we can help share all the cool work that Saber members are doing. And so these author pages are something that we've been adding to over time, and we'll be including research presentations from the National Convention. We'll be including the oral histories very soon, later this year. So that's, you know, again, another cool way to explore you know, what people have done for Saber, because we've got a lot of really amazing members who are doing some great research. And so we want to be able to highlight this and, you know, show it all in one place and give you a place to share all that great research that you've been working on. So the National Pastime archives are also online. This is our convention journal that we publish every year as part of the National Convention. Obviously, we're not going to have one this year, but we're still going to publish a National Pastime, all about looking ahead to the future of baseball over the next 20 years and see. We've got some great articles coming up about you know, what baseball might look like in 2040, 2 decades from now. So that'll be something that we'll be publishing later this year. But you can go through and read all the National Pastime articles as well, or download the PDFs here. And then finally, the Saber Digital Library. This is our ebooks publishing program that we've got. We just published a new book here called From Rube to Robinson. This is a compilation of all the great Negro Leagues research that Saber has done over the last 50 years. So we've got great articles from the Baseball Research Journal and the National Pastime and our convention journals and our books and magazines. And it's all compiled in one place to help celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues. And so this is the newest book in the digital library. It's free, a free ebook download for all Saber members. You can also buy the paperback for 50% off through Saber. And we've got, I think, 85 or 87 books now through the digital library. All of those are free ebook downloads for Saber members on a wide variety of subjects. And so you can go through and you can read. We've got a book about, again, all about baseball umpires, all about baseball scouts. We've got books on memorable teams like the 1935 Pittsburgh Crawfords or the 95 Braves. I'm from Atlanta, so that's a team very close to my heart. We've got a book called Green Cathedrals, a classic baseball book. This is the 5th edition of this book, all about ballparks that have hosted Major League or Negro Leagues games. And so that was published earlier last year. So you name it, there's probably something in the digital library that you'll find of interest. And you can download all these ebooks for free or get the paperbacks for a significant discount. So this is another cool way to explore what Saber is working on. And then down here, we've got a section about get involved. And you know, how, if you want to do your own research, if you want to get involved with an existing project that Saber is working on or a new book, we've got different ways for you to do that. If you want to propose your own project, we have a new editorial board that is going through all the different proposals. We'll be meeting in early April, I believe, to discuss some proposals that have come in over the last few months. And so that's something that we're always encouraging Saber members. If you have an idea, you know, if you want to work on something, if you already have a team built that, you know, you want to work on a specific subject, submit a proposal to our editorial board, and, you know, we'll be happy to consider that and, you know, have a new project coming up because we have no shortage of good ideas, that's for sure. And then ongoing writing opportunities. I want to just showcase this. A lot of people don't know this page is here. This is gives you an idea of what we're currently working on, and also some of our ongoing projects that you can get involved with at any time. Writing a bio for the bio project or writing for the games project. We've got those opportunities available if you want to get involved. This is great for students who want to build some clips. and get a peer-reviewed biography published through Sabre. This is great. If you're in your career and you just want to, do something different and work on baseball, or if you're retired and, you've got some free time and you want to write about baseball, we've got a lot of different publishing opportunities. And this is something that, Sabre has been growing and growing, especially over the last 10 years. We're probably producing more research now than, maybe in the first 30 or 40 years of Sabre's history. So it's really incredible what all Sabre members are working on. But this writing opportunities page gives you an idea of some of the projects that have already been approved that we're working on that you can get involved with. We've got books on the Kansas City Monarchs coming up, Major League Stars from Venezuela and the Dominican Republic. We've got a really cool online project, digital project called That's the Ticket, about the evolution of baseball tickets and the design of tickets that we're working on currently. So these are the current projects that are approved. And then here's some of the ongoing projects that you can get involved with at any time. The bio project, the games project, the digital library, team ownership, things like that. So again, any Sabre member is eligible to write or edit or fact check or any level of involvement. We're happy to have you as part of Sabre research projects. So.
Jacob, thank you. We have 4 authors coming up. So can you wrap it up, please?
Yep, absolutely. So that was the last thing I wanted to show everybody on the research collection. I'm happy to answer any questions or show you around. I'll stop sharing my screen now, but if anybody has any questions, feel free and I can help answer them.
Okay, well, apparently not. That's right. Thank you, Jacob. Now, obviously, there's a lot more we could delve into there.
Absolutely. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to email me or get in touch with me. And happy to get through anything. And I'm going to put a link in the chat to the YouTube presentation that I gave to the Northern California chapters last month that you can learn more about the Sabre website.
Great. Okay, I'm going to bring on Dan Taylor, who has, some of you may be familiar with his writing. He has written a new book, Lights, Camera, Fastball, How the Hollywood Stars Changed Baseball. Do we have anyone here who attended a Hollywood Stars game? We do, yes. Okay. So, Dan, you have a good audience.
That's terrific. Barry, thanks for this invitation. It's great. I'm a chapter member, and I think it's the second time I've been able to join all of you. But thank you. This is terrific, and what an honor to be part of a program with these great authors. And Brian, congratulations on Dalco. You did a great job, and Jarol, I'm looking forward to reading your book. And my new friend Steve, you did a tremendous job with yours. And Jacob, that presentation was tremendous. Your work. That website's a great resource. I was on it doing some more research work this morning, and you do great work on it. Thanks for everything you do with that. It's outstanding. I think the other authors involved today would probably agree that when you come out with a project, one of the first things somebody invariably asks you is, why did you do that? What made you pursue that? And in my case, Lights, Camera, Fastball, How the Hollywood Stars Changed Baseball was a product of my friendship with the late George Genovese. Actually, 3 people really initiated this, but I was very fortunate to have been asked to work with George to write his autobiography. And George often spoke very fondly of the 2 seasons he spent with the Hollywood Stars in 1949 and 1951. And what was interesting, we might be at a game at Dodger Stadium, or I might have accompanied him on a quick trip to look at a young player someplace. And invariably, there'd be something in the venue or something taking place on the field that George would point out and draw the line that it was connected to the Hollywood Stars. And that really got the wheels turning. One of George's closest friends is a guy by the name of Artie Harris. Some of you may know him. He was a scout in the movie Moneyball, a longtime coach in the Los Angeles area, and for more than 30 years worked in the Dodger baseball operations. Well, Artie grew up in the shadow of Gilmore Field, and so he just filled me with so many stories and made tons of introductions and put a lot of things in context that were just tremendously helpful. And the people that he introduced me to, I had people from time to time who would say, oh, do you know Dick Beveridge? You should really talk to Dick Beveridge. And Dick had helped me with some things on the George Genovese book, and at the 2015 Sabre convention in Miami, it was a real treat to be able to finally meet Dick face to face and spend some time with him. And I did not reach out to Dick Beveridge for a specific reason, and that is that I wanted to surprise him. I wanted Dick to have the greatest regard for Dick's passion and Dick's work and all he's done to preserve the history and to make others appreciate the history of the Pacific Coast League and the Hollywood Stars. And I filled this envelope out a long time ago. And I've had it sitting here on my desk because the first copy of the book, when I get my author's copies, which should be any day, is going to Dick Beveridge as a token of my gratitude for inspiring me. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful. I think all the authors will agree that in any project, you meet some amazing people. And that's one of the highlights of working on a book. And to get to sit down with the Irv Norins and the Chuck Stevenses and the Paul Pettits and people like that, it was such a treat. And I met Paul through George Genovese. Initially, we became good friends, talked often on the phone, had lunch when I was in LA. And he had such amazing stories about his time with Hollywood, as did Irv, as did Chuck Stevens, and family members and people who were bat boys, and it's just wonderful experiences. And it was tough these last couple of years getting to know these people well. And then we saw them pass, lost Chuck Stevens, lost Irv Norin, lost Paul. And that was a tough part of the project. But you also had some interesting experiences along the way. And I think every author will tell you that there's some things that just leave them shaking their head in amazement long after the book has come out. And I had two such interviews in this research project for this book. I saw a 1949 game note in the LA Times that talked of a high school pitcher from Salinas, Wes Brashini, being given a tryout before a Hollywood Stars game at Gilmore Field. And in the little tidbit, it mentioned that Branch Rickey happened to be in the stadium that day and that he came on the field and spent 20 minutes giving this young high schooler a pitching lesson. And when I read that, I thought, wow, wouldn't it be something to find this guy if he's still with us today and see what his lasting memory of that encounter with Branch Rickey is. And, you'd start, maybe you do a little bit of research and then you just, nah, he may not be with us anymore. And then you think, well, maybe I should, and you go back and forth for weeks. And ultimately, I found him just a few blocks from my house here in Fresno. And it was an amazing conversation, twofold, because his wife answered the phone when I initially called, and and I really got barked at. I mean, it was, what do you want to talk to him for? Don't you know he's 87? He's not going to remember anything back that far. And finally, she gave Wes the phone. And I'll tell you, it was an amazing conversation because it was like his meeting with Branch Rickey had only happened the day before. He was so excited to talk about it. He talked about it in such vivid detail. And he corrected things that were not true in the article, that Rickey wasn't giving him pitching lessons. Rickey was trying to sign him. He was trying to convince him to sign with the Dodgers rather than with Hollywood. The other interesting one, a guy named Johnny Cavalli, was the shortstop for Hollywood in 1945 and 46. And in my checking some different resources, it appeared that he was still with us. And I found him up in the Oakland area, and I sent him a letter and shared that I'd love to have the chance to chat with him, not really knowing what his health was like. And about 10 days later, I got a call from his son. And he said, well, this is great what you're working on. And he said, but my dad, his memory is just shot. And he said, and his hearing's not good at all. I'd love to help you, but I don't think it's going to work. So I kind of put it to the side. And a couple of days later, I get a call from the son again. And he said, I'm going to go spend Sunday with my dad. And why don't you email me some questions? And I said, no, I'm not going to email you questions. I'm going to email you some pictures. And I just want you to put those pictures in front of him and see how he reacts. Well, Sunday night, the son calls me practically hyperventilating, saying, this is amazing. He said, I put these pictures in front of my dad. I couldn't shut him up. And he said, he told me things I'd never heard before and things I had never known about my dad before. It was an amazing experience. We've got to get you guys connected on Skype. And we ultimately did. And it was a fun conversation. And I was able to get some nuggets out of him and confirm some things and get some clarification on some things. And it was an interesting experience, to say the least. One thing that really has rung loud and clear through everybody I've talked with, whether it's former players, the few that are still with us, children of Hollywood players, grandchildren, is this immense sense of pride they all feel for having that association with the Hollywood Stars. Guys like Chuck Stevens and Irv Noren, as you know, had played in the big leagues, but boy, to them, that time with Hollywood was really special. And I can understand that because people like Dick and others have shared with us what a unique environment Gilmore Field was. And I think the long lasting legacy is that, the team of the movie stars. They were there every night. The biggest names in Hollywood were in the boxes night after night and had great friendships and relationships with the players. Chuck talked of the many times he and his wife had dinner in Jimmy Stewart's home, and many of the players had stories like that. But I think that that's really overshadowed uh, one of the true sources of pride and really the lasting legacy of the Hollywood Stars, and that is as innovators. This team was maybe one of the most innovative clubs in baseball history. They were the first team outside of New York City on TV, the first minor league team to put a game on television, and the first team outside of New York City, March 30th, 1940, opening day of the 1940 season. They carried their game on what is today Channel 9, what back then was an experimental station, and there were only 300 sets in Los Angeles at that time. They were the first team to fly. Minor league teams were traveling by train to the higher levels and buses and station wagons at the lower levels. Even the presidents of the American and National League were telling their clubs they didn't want them flying because they were worried that an air accident could wipe out an entire ball club. But Hollywood, after the war, started flying, and they were not just flying, but flying Western Airlines charters up to Portland and Seattle and to the San Francisco Bay Area for games. We all know about the uniqueness of the uniform, that in 1950, they introduced the shorts and a T-shirt uniform, got them immense publicity. And most of us that know of the Hollywood Stars probably are aware that what we see today in every game, the mid-game break where they come out and groom the infield, that started with the Hollywood Stars at Gilmore Field to kind of counter the quick games that Jack Salveson would throw and that kept fans from getting to the concession stand. They put in this brief intermission and had to fight the powers that be, but they were finally able to get approval to try it out. And then everybody in baseball jumped on it and has done it for many, many years ever since. A few things that most people, I think, are surprised to learn about the Hollywood Stars was they created the California League. They wanted to get more involved in player development. They convinced the other California-based Pacific Coast League team owners to join them, and they all went out and recruited friends to own these clubs, and in 1941 launched the California League. It was put on hiatus in July of 42. Player shortage in World War II caused them to do that, and then when they came out of World War II, big league clubs jumped in and offered bigger money and sweeter offers to these clubs, and the club owners turned their back on the Coast League teams to align with the big league teams, and they have been ever since. And the Billings Mustangs, the Pioneer League team, that was started by the Hollywood Stars, again, wanting to have their own farm club where they could send more than just a couple of players and hire their own manager and be far more involved in the development of that talent. Where did all this come from? Well, it emanated from the top. It emanated from the guy who was responsible for putting the Hollywood Stars together, and that's Bob Cobb. He was the owner at that time of the most famous restaurant in the world, the Brown Derby, creator of the Cobb salad, huge sportsman. November of 1938 was presented by his attorney the opportunity to buy the Hollywood Stars, and he went out and gathered up a group of his movie star friends and directors and a few other business leaders in the community, and they raised $200,000 and bought the ball club and worked with Earl Gilmore to build Gilmore Field over on Earl Gilmore's property. Cobb he brought the same principles he employed at the restaurant to Gilmore Field, and that was quality, that was cleanliness, and that was attention to people. And I've often wondered, we see how Disneyland operates with their army of team members that run around cleaning up every little wrapper, and that's the way Bob Cobb had it done at Gilmore Field. He had a group of people that would go around sweeping up cigarette butts constantly, and I've often wondered, Walt Disney was an original box seat owner, and I wonder if that's where he may have gotten that idea from. Perhaps the lasting legacy of the Hollywood Stars that most people don't realize is Dodger Stadium. And some of you may be wondering where I'm going with that, but actually, Chavez Ravine was Bob Cobb's idea. In 1952, he went up to the police academy at the invitation of the chief. And while he was up there, He walked around, checked things out, and immediately realized this was the ideal place for a ballpark. He brought Bill Schroeder up the next day, and they looked at it together and agreed there were going to be 3 freeways servicing the area, and they felt that it was ideal. The Coast League at that time was bidding for Major League status, and the one thing that Ford Frick had told the league was that their ballparks were inadequate, and changes had to be made. So Cobb was looking at that, as well as the realization that after 57, his lease at Gilmore Field would expire. So he was looking for a new place to build a park. He commissioned a renowned architect, Styles O. Clements, and they put together a plan for a ballpark that was decades ahead of its time. It had restaurants, it had cocktail lounges, it had childcare, escalators coming up from the parking lots, and it had something that they called cabanas, which today every ballpark has in their suites. They were way ahead of their time. But they struggled to get any traction with the city. The city did not feel that the idea of the Coast League becoming a 3rd major league was viable. The county wanted Cobb to build somewhere else in the area, and he wouldn't do it. And then when the A's moved from Philadelphia to Kansas City and not to Los Angeles, the mayor received a lot of criticism, and he held a press conference, and he held up the brochure that Cobb had put together, and he said, "I've got a plan. Don't worry, don't be upset about us not getting the A's. We're going to get a team, and I've got a plan, and we're going to get a ballpark in Chavez Ravine." And basically, he'd taken Cobb's plan. Ultimately, when Walter O'Malley in 57 made his fact-finding trip to Los Angeles, he told the city leaders he wasn't going to meet with any of them until he first met with Bob Cobb. And that was his first meeting in Mr. O'Malley's suite in the Stadler Hilton. And Cobb laid out the blueprints and the plans that he had put together for a park in Chavez Ravine, laid out the maps to show him the service of the area. And he was immensely impressed. And he told the media later that he learned more in his meeting with Bob Cobb than he did the entire rest of his visit from all the city leaders that he met with. Ultimately, when O'Malley came to LA, that meant the end of the Stars, the end of the LA Angels. Dodgers took over ownership of the Angels and moved them to Spokane. There was a fleeting chance that the Stars could remain. City councilman from Long Beach went to the Coast League meetings and pitched the idea. They had just broken ground on Blair Field, and that they could expand it up to 9,000 seats. And Cobb was really excited about the idea of hanging on to the Stars and keeping them in Long Beach. But ultimately, the league was undergoing a shift of power. The balance of power that had been with 6 teams in California was gone. They now had the power base was in the Northwest. And when Cobb at the winter meetings left the room to make a work-related phone call, they hurried through a vote and voted to force him to sell to the group in Salt Lake City. And Cobb was irate about it, but he didn't want to be seen as the bad guy to hold things up. And he went ahead and gave in. The team was sold, and that was the end of the Hollywood Stars. But 63 years later, they may still be gone, but I think anytime we watch a professional baseball game, we're seeing something in that game, on that field, in that venue, that's the Hollywood Stars. So I appreciate the chance to share that with you, and welcome your questions or comments. Left you speechless.
So Barry, we got to see the Salt Lake City Bees that were formerly the Hollywood Stars in 59.
58.
58
yeah.
or 59. 58, yeah. Pirate farm team.
Right.
R.C. Stevens, Carlos Bernier, a whole host of players. I imagine they played for some of them played for the Stars the year before.
Ken Toothman, Dick Bartolome.
Yeah, Dick Hall actually won 19 games one year.
Yeah.
Dan, this is the second time for me to hear you speak, and I thoroughly enjoyed it both times. You're
Thank you
two
very
for
much.
2. You're batting 1,000 with me.
Thanks. That's very kind of you. It's good to see you.
I'd like to make a comment.
Please.
Okay, my name is David Holtz. I grew up in Los Angeles, and nobody in my family was interested in baseball. I discovered it from my friends at school, in grammar school. And in those days, the early 50s, there was the Hollywood Stars and the Los Angeles Angels. And I was an Angels fan, primarily because the announcer for the Angels was Bob Kelly, and he made the game seem so dramatic. And the Angels played in a better stadium. It was Wrigley Field. They were the farm team of the Chicago Cubs. And Wrigley Field was a much better stadium than Gilmore Field, where the Stars played. And Wrigley Field had even ivy on the left field wall in imitation of the Chicago. The Stars were the farm team of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And truthfully, in those days, the farm teams were as good or better than the major league teams, which fought it out for last place. A few years ago, and I think Don Zaminda is with us today, the local Sabre group here in Los Angeles had a day where we went and visited all the old baseball sites in Los Angeles, going back into the late 19th century. And one of the things we did was we went by where Gilmore Field was, which is near the Farmers Market in Los Angeles, or the CBS studios. And there's actually a plaque there that we saw. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thanks, I appreciate it. What a wonderful time that must have been.
So thank you.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Dan.
Yes.
I'm Vic Pallas. I had an opportunity in the late 80s to visit the Gilmore home that I think is still there today on the
Yes, it
Farmers
is.
Market property. And there was a gentleman who allowed me to go up in the attic of that home and go through some of the scrapbooks, memorabilia, photographs, and I assume you spent some time in that attic.
I didn't in the attic. I was over in the marketing department with their people over there, and they had a lot of stuff there. And what's really cool is you walk into the marketing office there, and the walls are just all these framed, matted game action pictures from the Hollywood Stars.
I'm interested because I do a lot of writing myself of different things. Tell me a little bit about how you scheduled your research and how long it took to put this book together.
It was probably a couple of years, and just worked it around my day job, obviously.
Which is?
I work in PR for a large fitness equipment manufacturer here in Fresno. But yeah, it was just loads of time spent on the phone, loads of time spent on the internet, libraries. It was pretty extensive and a great deal of fun. I really enjoy that. Research is something I thoroughly enjoy, and so yeah, it was a fun project.
Just one comment, just from the samples of the writing that has been posted, the detail which you go into in the discussions, it almost puts you in the room.
Thank you. That's the goal.
Yes, I appreciate what you've done there.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. That's great. We look forward to that book coming out.
Thanks, and look forward to getting together so I can join a meeting in person.
When is it available?
March 10th. It's available now for pre-order on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and the publisher Rowman and Littlefield's website.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Our next author is Jerry Manheim. We know that Christy Mathewson died at the age of 45. Supposedly he was exposed to some chemicals during World War I. And Jerry has a book entitled This Never Happened, The Mysterious Death of Christy Mathewson. Take it away, Jerry.
All right. Thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen. That working?
We're seeing a bunch of thumbnail sketches. You have to, if you could pick one.
Well, I'm seeing the first slide. You're not seeing that?
No,
The first slide is a bunch of pictures of books?
We're seeing all the slides.
You're okay. Well, let me try to figure out why that's happening. All right, so you're
Hit
seeing all the slides.
slideshow.
Yeah,
Hit
well, yeah,
slideshow if
I
it's
did
a
that and it
PowerPoint.
was working here. Are you still seeing all the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, that's really strange. All right, let me try something else then. Now are you seeing a bunch of books?
No, we're just seeing all the slides.
Nothing's changed.
My goodness.
Sorry, Jarol.
Is your presentation a PDF or a PowerPoint?
No, it's a PowerPoint, and
Oh.
usually it runs.
Yeah, well,
okay.
slideshow ought to do the
Yeah.
trick.
Yeah, that's what I was trying.
There we
to
go. Now
That-
you
Yeah,
have it.
there it is.
You,
Okay,
you got it.
Now let me try slideshow off of this screen. Is that working?
We're seeing the books.
Well, that's
seeing the
good
books.
enough.
You're seeing the books.
Yeah,
Okay. well,
right.
if you're seeing about a dozen books, we're on the slides.
Right.
Okay. Let me first tell Dan that I've been seeing a couple of advertisements for your book, and now I know I have to read it. That was really quite good, and thank you for that. And also thanks to Barry for the invitation to be there with you all. I guess I'm one of the beneficiaries of COVID-19 in the sense that I'm in Annapolis. I'm in the Bob David and Babe Ruth chapters over here, Baltimore and Washington. And I'd never get to do this if we weren't on Zoom. So I guess that's one thing that came out of that. There is a lot of baseball fiction that's been produced over the years. Here are just a few examples of some of the books. Some of them I think are pretty good. Some of them I think are not as great as they might be, but they all have some things in common. They're about games and players and teams and seasons and the elements of the game often that are associated with what happens on the field. And I find myself writing a novel that's a bit different. And did you just see a slide change?
No,
No slide change?
Not yet.
just click on the next slide yourself.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to this.
There we go. That works.
All right, and I'm gonna shrink this and we'll just go from there. All right, so now you're seeing Charlie Chaplin?
Yes.
Okay. A few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I stumbled across some old papers, and the more I thought about them, the more I realized that I was observing an historical anomaly or a violation of the laws of physics, because there was a group of people, some prominent baseball players, who were somehow documented to be in 2 places at once. And the more I thought about that, the more curious I became, and I started to think about how that might actually have happened. So I ended up looking at a history that's going to be familiar to a lot of people on this call, and then looking at briefly at some of the criticisms of that history, and then trying to reconcile it with these papers that I had found. And these are the things I want to tell you about, and then spin my book out of that. Briefly, because that's how the book developed, out of this combination of things that couldn't really happen together. So here's the book. It's coming out April 27 from Summer Game Books, and it's called "This Never Happened: The Mystery Behind the Death of Christy Mathewson." And the mystery puts Mathewson at the center of this, but in a way that's kind of a device, but we'll talk about that. There are 2 basic players at the heart of this story, and they're familiar to everybody, Ty Cobb and Christy Mathewson, so I'm not going to take the time here to talk about them, but they were certainly very different personalities, as we all know. And at the same time, they were friends, and that becomes part of this as well. The setting is World War I, 1917. After the Zimmerman telegram, the US declares war, and they begin recruiting people to go into the military. It's not a popular war, and the US didn't really have much of a standing military at that point, so they had to develop not only in the military, but the appreciation for the need for a military to be involved significantly in world affairs. It was a tough sell. The first week of the war, President Wilson hired this man, George Creel, who was a former journalist, to be in charge of American propaganda efforts. And he had a couple of different jobs. One was to defend against incoming propaganda, particularly from Germany, that was intended basically to make sure that Americans were disinterested in participating in the war, to demobilize the population. The other side of his responsibility was to build support for the war internally within the country, and that essentially amounted to domestic propaganda. The group there pictured at the bottom is the Committee on Public Information, of which Creel was the chair. He was a hard-nosed fellow. We know, for example, from Skip Desjardins' book, and I'll hold it up here, September 1918 War Plague and the World Series, talks about how the propagandists made sure that the military training camps near cities like Boston, when they started seeing cases of flu develop, kept the bases open, kept the traffic going back and forth between the cities and the bases, because they didn't want to make the population think that somehow the flu was a product of the war and become less willing to support the war. So he had that edge to what he did. And also he had some experience with baseball. Creel had been the New York State president of the president of the New York State Suffrage Society. And one of the things he had done a couple of years before the war started was he had bought 12,000 tickets to a Giants game and 125 boxes, and his group went and they ringed the stadium with their banners for suffrage. So he understood the publicity value of baseball. And as the war went on, baseball, of course, wanted to demonstrate that it was playing its part. So, as you know, they had the teams doing close order drill before the games. This is Cleveland doing with rifles, but I think some of the teams simply did it with baseball bats. And the idea was to demonstrate commitment to the country, but also to do a little protection for baseball, because the president had declared that baseball and its continuity was in the national interest. But as things developed in 1918, it got more complicated. The letter on the left here is from Franklin Roosevelt when he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy to the Commandant of the 1st Naval District. And he had just heard from Harry Frazee, who had told him that he'd already lost a dozen players to the military and he was going to have a hard time putting a team on the field in 1918. And there were 2 players who were working in the commandant's office, and they were just doing clerical things. And would it be all right, Roosevelt wants to know, if those 2 players were released back to the team so they could play on the field? And then there's a little handwritten note down there that says, we can always call them back if we really need them. So that's January of 1918. By July of 1918, the man in the middle there, Newton Baker, who was Secretary of War, had the government had instituted the draft about a month earlier, and he had exempted baseball players, but then he lifted the exemption in July. And here's another letter or a telegram from Frazee to Gary Herman, who was the chairman of the National Commission, saying that really we might need to shorten our season. And let me read this little cartoon from that same time, since the print's going to be small for those of you who are on small screens. Baseball players must fight or work in war necessities industries if within the draft age. The player is saying, if I fight, a soldier's pay will not pay my wife and children's keeping. With the high cost of living in it will take a long time to learn a lucrative craft. And then at the bottom says, gloomy outlook for baseball, the national game. So there was a lot of ferment here, and baseball players suddenly found themselves with choice of playing in industrial league, well, working for wartime industries, which meant playing in industrial leagues, and perhaps it was all they were doing, or joining the military. And a lot of them joined teams like the Bethlehem Steel team in these industrial leagues, particularly in the Northeast. But that wasn't enough to meet the needs of the military. This is General William Seibert, who was the commander, the first commander of the Chemical Warfare Service, which was popularly called the Gas and Flame Division. And the quote here is really extracted from a longer quote. What they did, they needed to recruit people into doing this very nasty work. And they held a big press conference in Washington, and they invited most or many of the prominent reporters of the day. And they announced that they were looking for baseball players and athletes to do this work, basically to be role models and to help them recruit people into the Chemical Warfare Service. They didn't care about age. They'd take people who were too young to be drafted, people who were too old to be drafted, but they were looking for people with good skills. And in particular, they started looking for some baseball players. General Seibert got in touch with Perry Houghton, who was just retired in 1916 as the head football coach at Harvard, when that actually meant something, and had bought a share, I think about 10% of the Boston Braves. So he was in baseball now. And he got in touch with Branch Rickey, and Branch Rickey recruited him. They were both in the Chemical Warfare Service. And Rickey in turn recruited Ty Cobb and Christy Mathewson. And this is all known, established kind of history, and everybody knows the story since then, which is sort of what Barry described. Cobb and Mathewson become captains at the end of that season. They get shipped over to France. They're training on poison gas. There's an accident. They're both involved, but Mathewson gets by far the worst of it, and the story continues that he comes back and his lungs are weakened, and he died about 5 or 6 years later in 1925 of tuberculosis. That's the established history. And you can see it here in this Associated Press obituary for Mathewson, a hero of the World War, as well as the diamond on which he was the first big college star. He died late last night of tuberculosis and pneumonia, the result of being gassed while a captain in the Chemical Warfare Service in France. That is the established delivered history. Now, there have been some recent criticisms of that history, some anomalies. Howard Rosenberg did a piece where he summarized some of them. He referred to an affidavit from a surgeon, division surgeon, who said that if Mathewson was exposed, it was elsewhere and only after the war. Amos Fries succeeded Seibert as the head of the Chemical Warfare Service. He said it never happened. And Branch Rickey said he was with Mathewson throughout the training in France, and he said that the accident never occurred. So already we're having some questions raised about the delivered history. But what if? Let's use our imaginations a bit. What if there was a camp in Georgia where the Gas and Flame Division did its training? And what if the Army in baseball, because we're in this political situation where they want to attract recruits with role models to this new Chemical War Service. So the Army in baseball create a show unit, and they recruit 7 future Hall of Famers. Now, of course, the Hall of Fame didn't come along for almost 20 years after that, but that caliber of player. The unit was led, let's say, by Lieutenant Christy Mathewson, who, not captain, but second lieutenant actually, who reported to Colonel Branch Rickey. And included in this unit were Corporal Frank Baker, Corporal Max Carey, Private Frank Chance, Corporal Ty Cobb, Private Davy Jones, Ordnance Sergeant Honus Wagner, and Private Ed Walsh. And let's say that these members were documented to be in Georgia training on poison gas. And at the very same time, they were documented, at least some of them, playing and managing in major league games. And let's say that there's no mention of what we today would call a propaganda dream team in the press of the day, no mention at the hall, no mention in the histories, including, here's Jim Leaks from the dugouts to the trenches, which is a history of baseball in World War I. In his index, he lists about 8 or 10 different training camps and baseball activities there, but there's no reference there. What could account for that? And my page is not changing, so let's do this. Well, there was such a camp. It was called Camp Hancock, and it was a pretty ugly place, as you can see from the picture on the top there. And the back, there's row after row of tents. The camp also had some established buildings, including the largest one was a very large hospital. Now down at the bottom here, and I'm going to assume that some of you can't read that, but the picture at the bottom right is a map of the developed area where the buildings and tents were at Camp Hancock. And it had 1,319 buildings, 45,099 men was the capacity, total area of 13,811 acres. And the camp proper, which is represented in this map, filled 1,777 acres. Bottom left is a map of the city of Augusta from approximately that time period. And in the middle, you can see at the top is the city of Augusta. And I don't know if you can see my little arrow here or not, but here's the city of Augusta, this. And here is the camp right below it, that's this. And all the rest of this was also part of this training area. So it was there and it's a pretty big deal. And there was such a unit. And these are the two pieces of paper that really got me into this topic. The first one on the left, which is difficult to read. And by the way, these are not the original documents. These are renderings of the original documents. The way in which I found them, I wasn't able to reproduce them, so I hired an illustrator who did that, and they look exactly like this. We introduced a couple of small changes so we could always tell ours from the originals, but the book tells you how to get to the originals. The paper on the left is the payroll of Ordnance Depot Company number 44, Camp Hancock, Georgia, June 1 to June 20. June 30, the actual date. That's one of the changes we made was June 20. And the names down the left, I've highlighted them, the significant ones. You'll see the first name is John Wagner. I would argue in the context of the other names that was Honus Wagner. But if you think about 1918, Germanic names like Johannes and Honus and Hans, a lot of people were anglicizing those names, but it's also possible that whoever, the clerk or whoever was filling out paperwork for the Army heard Johann and didn't know how to spell it, so spelled it as John. I don't know. But the other ones there are T.R. Cobb, Max Carey, Frank Chance, Davy Jones, Ed Walsh, Frank Baker, Jones being the only one of those men who did not get into the Hall of Fame when it was formed later on. And the document has serial numbers and rates of pay and a variety of other things, rank and so forth. The second document, which is essentially the daybook from this unit, has some interesting characteristics, which for reasons of time, I'm not going to go into, but if you look carefully at it, you can see there are two different handwritings, and you can see where they change because the column day of the month, you can see that the way the dates are written changes about halfway down. Here's Christy Mathewson, who's not on the roster there because he was an officer. Second Lieutenant Mathewson hospitalized, and another Private Chance hospitalized, Private Stone quarantined. 4 days later, Second Lieutenant C. Mathewson hospital to duty. And there are other movements and things, and there's some other odds and ends and interesting things that happen in this document, comings and goings and the like. Between them, these two documents, which have been authenticated, as I understand it, place these people in Augusta, Georgia, or near it, the first 10 days of June of 1918. Here is a page from Baseball Reference from June 7, the same week, which shows that Ty Cobb batted second in a game against the Senators and got a triple. So we're in two places at once. How do we explain that? Well, that's where my book really picks up. let's suppose, what if there was some kind of incident? Now remember, these people are in Georgia training on chemical weapons in order to be role models and to get publicity to show that this is good and safe work. But what if there was an incident involving Mathewson and Cobb and others? Instead of showing how much fun it was to do this, showed how dangerous it was. And what if that incident created an embarrassment for the Army and an embarrassment for baseball, because baseball has a lot at stake here. They're trying to demonstrate that they're patriotic at a time when there have been some people with doubts of that. So they've put together this propaganda unit, and something has gone wrong. If you do crisis management, you know that the first thing you're going to do is get the gray hairs together and figure out how to resolve this. So let's say that there's a meeting at the base, and the Army and the person of General Seibert and others, baseball, Ban Johnson, others, Committee on Public Information, represented by George Creel, they come together and they come up with a plan. And they move decisively to cover up what happened. And they come up with a cover story that involves sending Cobb and Mathewson to France a little bit later, where they're going to have a training accident. And Mathewson and Cobb would go along with this. They joined this unit because they were patriots, and they would go along with this when the significance of it becomes clear, that it's the patriotic thing to do. And let's say that everybody else in that unit is either sent home or sent to another camp or sent to the front. But before that happens, they're all sworn to silence on pain of death, because this is a national security matter. It's national security because of the propaganda, but also because perhaps of the nature of the particular incident that occurred. And what if George Creel, who by the end of the meeting is running the show, says, gentlemen, remember, for the good of the nation, for the good of the Army, and of course, for the good of baseball, this never happened. And that's where my title comes from. Now, apparently it never happened. Here is the Augusta newspaper from the very same week in which those military papers are dated. And the item in the center is a Friday paper, which points out that there's going to be a baseball game, that the Charleston Navy Yard team is coming to town to play the Camp Hancock team. By Saturday, you have the lineups. That's the article on the right. You have the lineups. And the lineup for Camp Hancock is Thomas, Larson, Howard, Putnam, Dwyer, Butler, Donahue, Gaffney, Auer. There are certain names missing from that of people who are presumably in that camp. And the full page on the right is from Sunday. This is the front page from a special issue. Now, this camp had been in existence for quite a while. It was built starting in 1917. We're halfway into 1918. This is a special issue focused on Camp Hancock. And welcome to Augusta, and a focus on the ordnance units up there in the upper left-hand corner. Pictures of some of the military leadership in the middle. And if you were doing PR for the military and you had these players coming to camp, you would have wanted the local paper to run a special issue that week. And that might explain why this special issue was run. But then this problem arises, because all of a sudden you can't publicize this unit. You can't talk about it. They can't play in the game. And not only that, if you're the newspaper, you have a problem because you've laid out this special issue. It's been planned in advance, and you have a huge news hole. And suddenly you're told by the censors that you can't fill it. So what do? Here is a 3-column article that lists by name every individual member of the military police force at Camp Hancock, and most of them are privates. And then down at the bottom, when they ran out of names, there's a list of churches and pastors. That's a lot of space to give over to the names of 250 privates who are military police. I suggest to you that it's filler because they ran into a little problem. So when you put the pieces together, you've got people in 2 places at once, and the official record says that this company never existed. It's not in the histories. It's not in the biographies of any of these players. It's not in the war histories. It's not in the contemporaneous news accounts. And I also, one of the things I did in researching the book, and Dan was right, you meet some interesting people. I went down to Augusta. I had a chance to go through the old Ty Cobb family home, which is not public, and met some people, one of whom was an editor for the Augusta Chronicle. And he looked back in the private archives of the Chronicle, which was the other paper in town back then, and found no reference to these players. How can that be? If this never happened, something had to happen. And the question is, what was it? So you can take my suggestion for what happened in the book, or you can come up with your own. The book set in 3 time periods: World War I, when something happened; 1936, the formation of the Hall of Fame, when the cover-up is discovered and then lost to history, and a second time, and then the present day, when there are some things that happen. The principal characters in the stories from those 3 time periods weave together through the book. The principal characters from World War I are all real people: Christy, Mathewson, Ty Cobb, Branch Rickey. H.R. Barnum was the real clerk of that ordnance company at Hancock. George Creel was a real person. The rest of the characters in subsequent time periods are mostly fictional. In 36, I created J.T. Willett, America's premier baseball writer, and some of you will recognize elements of other famous baseball writers in that character. And Jocko Drum, an itinerant who suddenly does better than he'd been doing. And then in the present day, Jocko's grandson, Jason, and Jason's friend. And through this are woven the discovery, loss, rediscovery of this event. Well, as Winston Churchill supposedly said, sometimes we stumble over the truth and we pick ourselves up and we go away as if nothing happened. There are 2 truths here, and we need to figure out which one is the true truth, or whether both are true, and they're true through the mechanism of censorship and cover-up that I've suggested. Now, I know you all are out in LA, and I know you run into Kevin Costner every day over Dupar. Is Dupar still there? I remember that from the 50s and 60s. So if you run into Kevin, tell him that he's missing out on the next great baseball movie. The book is now available for pre-order from Summer Game Books, and I think at a slight discount. It is or will be available from Amazon. If you'd simply like to get an email notice of when it's published, if you just send me an email to that address, jerry@themanheims.net, with your name and email address and the subject line TNH for This Never Happened, I will be glad to tell you. And I'm probably pretty close on time, but that's not supposed to be there. It wouldn't have been. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're back now. Okay, so I'm happy to answer any questions or tell you anything about how this all came about or whatever.
Hi, hey, thank you. I have a question about the brief view of the newspaper lineup cards for that game against the Georgia team and the Navy Yard team. I noticed there was a Waddell, Waddell, listed as shortstop for the Navy Yard team. I was wondering if you knew it was that Rube or anybody else that we might know of. I mean, the name just, struck me.
It's an interesting question. And Perry, I recently saw you on another one of these Sabre presentations and really enjoyed what you had to say.
Thank you.
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I haven't looked at the Charleston Navy Yard team. I don't know the answer to that. It's entirely
because wasn't he famous for being in 2 places at one time? Thank you. I really enjoyed this very much. Thank you.
Jerry, thank you very much. That sounds like a very interesting book, and wish you best of luck on that. So thanks for presenting to us. We have 2 more authors, so we want to move it along. Our next author is Stephen Bradkovich, who loves trees and baseball, and is going to talk to us about the baseball bat from trees to the major leagues, 19th century to today.
Thank you, Barry. Let me share the screen. That didn't work. Can you see anything now?
Yes, we see your presentation.
All
We see the
right.
cover of the book.
I want to get started here. First of all, I want to mention that I have a neurological disease and it impacts my speech. So if you have a question, you can't understand me, interrupt me and I'll try and talk a little slower. Thank you for that. As Dan said, we often have a reason for writing the book. And I guess my reason was I'm a forester by training. I like trees and wood, and I love baseball. And you put the two together, and it's the baseball bat that comes from trees that's part of our national pastime. And I've always been intrigued with that. So I thought I'd, write the book. This was something that I always was interested in. So I wanted to put down on paper what I think about in my mind. And this book came out last summer. The publisher is McFarland. And like you've heard before from some of the other authors, the book is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and other booksellers. And I think one of the most interesting things about the book for me was talking and interviewing the bat makers, the billet makers. And if you don't know what a billet is, I'll talk about that. I enjoyed talking to researchers, the Sabre members, and others. So I really enjoyed putting the book together. And I'll get into my presentation. If I can, you should be able to see it, the second slide. Is that right? Barry or someone? Can you see that
Yeah,
slide?
yeah, we're good.
Okay. The chapters that I'm going to talk about are on the right in red. On the right are other chapters in the book, but the ones in the red I'll be discussing today. And these two are more of the technical chapters. And most of the book is not that technical, but what I'm going to talk about today is somewhat technical when you talk about baseball bats. And another reason I was interested in the subject is chapter 6 on bats breaking in major leagues. The head researcher for that study commissioned by Major League Baseball was the Forest Products Lab in Madison, Wisconsin. And being a forester and living in St. Paul, Minnesota, I worked a lot with the Forest Products Lab in Madison during my career. And so I was really interested in the subject when I found out that Major League Baseball essentially hired a team of researchers led by one of the people at the Forest Products Lab where I'd been many times. So another reason I got into this subject. Now, again, it's kind of technical, but just bear with me. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 different surfaces of wood, and then the species, weight, and density issues. Okay, and on the slide, you'll see that there are 3 main surfaces of wood. And if you cut a log into lumber, you'll see the board on the left is the radial, what's called the radial surface. And the one on the right is called the tangential. And the one on the left is where we're taught to hit the ball. And the one on the right, the B, the tangential, that's where the trademark normally is. And I have another picture here to better illustrate that. And because of some distortion, it looks like the bat on the right is a little bit curved, but it's not really. But the A side is where you hit the ball, whether you're right-handed or left-handed batter. And I show that on the right with the bat, the A is the edge, and the B is where the trademark is. So those are the 3 surfaces. C is the middle, the center of the cross section. That's at the end of the bat or on the handle, where you count the rings on the age of the trait by the rings. You can see that on the edge. Or excuse me, you can see that on the end or the handle. So again, there's those 3 surfaces. And just keep that in mind. When this guy played, Ted Williams, the species of choice was white ash. And they picked ash because it was a strong wood, but it was a flexible wood. And the flexibility and the strongness relates to the density. It wasn't too heavy like hickory or some other woods you might pick up and say, well, that's a very dense piece of wood, but it would be too heavy to swing on a, fastball was coming in, you would have a hard time getting around on the ball with a hickory bat. Although hickory was popular in the early days, very early, like the dead ball era, back in the teens and before, they didn't take a full swing necessarily. They would just punch a ball, and hickory was okay. But when Ted Williams, he really emphasized bat speed. And with the bat speed, you couldn't have a real heavy bat. So the white ash is what he focused on. And I'll explain this later, but white ash is called ring, R-I-N-G, ring porous. And you can see the rings very well on it. Now, up to by the year 2000, the big firms dominated the market, like Harris and Bradby, a Spalding, Adirondack. It's like the automakers. You might have General Motors and Ford, for example. They were big companies. But around 2000, this all changed when this guy came on the scene. And this guy is Sam Holman. He was a carpenter in Ottawa, Canada. And he felt he couldn't really improve on the ash bath. So he crafted his bath out of maple. And he took his bath to spring training one year, and he took a guy by the name of Barry Bonds. And Barry Bonds started using his bath. And because of the home runs that Barry Bonds hit, and I won't get into other reasons why he might have hit so many, but many other players decided they wanted to make bat. So this individual, Sam Holman, I think Sports Illustrated said he started the rise of the boutique bat companies. Small people, like folks on this call, you might say, went out to their wood shop and made a bat. And many of the companies today, that's how they got started. And Sam Holman was essentially one of the first that did that. Now, I'm just one slide here on maple versus ash. I said before, maple is not ring porous, and the next slide is going to show that. It's diffuse porous, so it's more difficult to see the grain of the wood, and this was very important. It's not as flexible as ash, even though it is stronger slightly and slightly harder than ash. So maple had some things going for it, but not everything going for it. And next picture, this is, if you took a piece of wood and looked at it through a microscope, this is what we call ring porous. You can see the rings here, and these little openings are what's called pores. And you might think of those as drinking straws. So if you go out to water a tree in your front yard, the water and any other nutrients are gonna go up these little pores or straws. They're gonna go up the tree in those. And sometimes they're arranged, they're very easy to see. If you've ever looked at red oak, for example, a piece of it, you can easily see the rings. 1 year, second year, and third year. The very easy to see. And over here, this is called diffuse porous. And this is like maple. And you only have these lines really to show you the years. It's 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years. And you can ignore this one for now, but it's much easier to count the rings on the ash than it is maple. And that poses a problem. Because maple is not ring porous, it's diffuse, so it's more difficult to see the grain. And because you can't see the grain as well, some inferior baseball bats were being made and sold. And then things like this happened. the bats, the maple bats, essentially started exploding and shattering into a couple pieces. And here's one just flying into the stands. So this got so bad in Major League Baseball that in 2008, the MLB decided they needed to do something. And they formed a study team. And the leader of that team was at that previously mentioned Porous lab in Madison, Wisconsin. And I knew some of the people on that team. So that was another reason I became interested in this topic. And the study team looked at many things, but they came back to this diagram here, and they were really looking at the grains of the wood. And this board, you can see is a straight grain piece. And these are the billets. This is what the bat maker, they used to make them all themselves, but now there are companies that just make these billets. This is what they're called. They're like long dowels. Think of a rolling pin without the handles. They're about 38 or so inches long and about 2 3/4 inches in diameter. So the bat maker gets these, but if the billet was sawn at an angle, and so, because you can't see the grain on maple, a billet like this sawn out of that wood looks pretty straight if you just pick it up, because you can't see the grain. So the research team called this a slope of grain. If we have a billet that's not straight, there's a slope in the grain. And the study team made 9 recommendations. And they really found that 2 issues were very important. That slope of the grain and easy to see grain. Those are key in baseball bats. So if you have a bat that's not cut straight to the grain, you have a weaker bat. And maple is hard to see the Nash. So then the team said, well, how can Major League Baseball tell that the maple grain is straight? How's the MLB going to do that? And the answer they came up with was if you have a stained handle on, say, maple, that you leave a little opening that's not stained. You can put like a sticker, little sticker that you see in a garage sale, and you can put those on the handle before you paint it. And then you put this little dot. See that little dot right there? That's ink or dye. And when that wicks through those pores, it'll follow the grain. And I got a better picture. If you can see that right, this happens to be the owner. the Dovetail Bat Company in Maine. But if you look down here in the corner, you can see this bat here, cup bath, and you can see that dot in the ink right there. And when the ink hits the wood, it'll run with the grain. And Major League Baseball has a angle that they allow the ink to follow. In other words, if it goes perfectly straight at 0 degree slope of grain, and if it's slightly off, it might be 1% or 2%. And the angle is, I think 5% is the cutoff. So anything worse than 5% slope of grain is not allowed in the major leagues. And you can see some of these bats back here, the ones that have clear handles don't have any dots. But if it's painted, it has a dot. So if you watch on TV or go to a major league game and you see a bat that has a handle that's painted and you see that dot on it, then it's not a Nash bat. It's probably maple. Another species like maple is a yellow birch. And actually there are roughly as many yellow birch bats in major leagues now as there are ash. A yellow birch is like maple, and that is a diverse wood or diffuse porous wood, excuse me. The other thing the team recommended and Major League Baseball adopted was this trademark. On maple bats, they rotated the trademark 90 degrees. So for some of us old timers that they used the wooden bat when we were young, you know, where we would hit the ball, that's where they placed the trademark now on a maple bat. And the reason is that they found through research that the trademark side of a typical bat, which is the tangential surface of the bat, is actually stronger. So because that surface is stronger, they decided to rotate this trademark for maple and birch and other diffuse porous species. They did not rotate it on ash, but they did on maple. So in conclusion, you know, I covered a lot of, might say techie stuff today, but most of the book is not technical, but the 2 chapters that I touched on today a little bit, those are the more technical ones, and they're kind of the essence, you might say, of the book. So I wanted to focus on them. And I'm going to stop now and take any of your questions, but I appreciate your attention today. And if you have questions or you couldn't follow what I said, please ask them now and I'll try and answer them. Thank you very much. And I'm making an attempt here to stop the screen sharing and turn it back to Barry.
Stephen, thank you. That really was good.
Yeah,
So I will encourage anyone who has questions to email Steve. We have his email address here, or better yet, buy the book. Thank you. Enjoyed that a lot.
There are many really interesting facts in the book and related to the breakage. In another chapter, I think you mentioned a guy, Joel Sewell, a Hall of Famer, who used the same bat for 14 years, his entire career. And on the flip side, you've got Derek Jeter, who bought 4,300 bats.
yeah,
That was really interesting.
yeah. Some of the old-time players, they didn't break many bats, but Derek Jeter didn't necessarily break them either. But he bought a lot. He had a lot. He
Sure did.
didn't use all those, but he ordered them from Louisville Slugger.
Okay, great. Thank you.
In 1997, the Sabre National Convention was in Louisville, and it was right down the street from the H&B bat company and factory. And if my memory serves me correctly, we actually were given a tour of where they made the bats, and that was very interesting. And outside the factory, they had a bat that was like 30 feet tall, like a telephone pole.
Right.
Does anybody else remember that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was
Yes.
very
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah, I was not a Sabre member then, but I've been to that bat factory, H&B bat factory, a couple times. So it's very interesting. And you're right about that big bat out front.
Okay. Well,
The
thank you.
one thing
again,
about that
Steve.
convention, I especially, Pee Wee Reese was very sick. He died shortly thereafter, but he was the Louisville colonel. And also Carl Erskine spoke, and he has a special needs son. And it was very touching the way he related to his son as he gave his talk.
Yeah.
I
Very good.
I'm a member of the Louisville chapter, and there was a question about where if TV Reach was going to show for that convention. And I also wanted to ask Stephen if he had any trivia questions to ask.
I didn't quite follow that.
I wanted to ask you if you had any trivia questions to ask.
Or trivia.
You know, we sorry, Ryan, we have another speaker here,
That's okay.
and I want to give him time. But Stephen, thank you. And
You're welcome.
again, I do recommend the book. Our final speaker today, Brian Vikander. If you remember the advertisements for the most interesting man in the world, I think Brian could qualify. He is one of the co-authors of the story about Steve Dalkowski. Brian's a pitching coach. He's also a world-class photographer who has traveled to just about every country in the world, and his pictures of him are seen in National Geographic, New York Times. So, Brian, are you able to share with us? Brian, do we have you?
Am I there, Barry?
Yeah, there you go. Go ahead, please.
First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for the marvelous presentations and the insightful look at yet new uncovered territory in baseball. They do say that after religion, there is no subject that is more covered and thought about than baseball. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about Dalko, the untold story of baseball's fastest pitcher. There are 6 areas that I will cover as we talk through this. I'm going to go through a brief introduction. I really believe that Steve Dalkowski is the last great American sports hero. He's a legend, where he conveyed the story, the human side of the objectified Dalkowski as we wrote this book. We looked to separate fact from fiction because as things had continued on in Steve's life, the myths became far bigger, brighter, and louder than anything that arrived close to the fact. Fourth thing is that I want to look at how we came closer to substantiating Steve Dalkowski as the fastest pitcher. Fifth area.
Are you there, Brian?
He might be muted, Barry.
He's using a telephone. Brian? Okay, are you back? Brian, you got interrupted. Brian, please go ahead. Are you there? Oh boy. He's not actually muted. And I read the book, and it, as he said, it is loaded with facts, very well researched, and also brings out the personal side of Dalkowski. And unlike a lot of baseball biographies, it spends a lot of time talking about what happened to Dalkowski after baseball, which is a rather sad story. Brian, are you? Not sure what happened here. He shows up as being participating here. I wonder if his phone died. It's a shame because it's a terrific book. Has anyone else read this? Oh boy. Can I answer any questions about the book?
Yes, I have one question, Barry.
Yes, Ryan.
Yeah. What year are we talking about, or years?
When you
he played.
Yeah, we're talking about late 50s, early 60s.
Okay, thank you.
So he's He graduates high school in, I think, 57. And I think his final year is 64 before they give up on him.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, he was one of those guys who just looked terrific warming up, was great on the sidelines. And then he'd get in a game and couldn't find home plate. And Brian is a pitching coach, as I mentioned, and there's you can pretty much pick out the paragraphs that he wrote where he talks about the mistakes that pitching coaches of that day made, how a modern pitching coach probably could have solved all of these problems, which were probably mental. Other questions?
Hey, Barry.
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering how did he speculate that he was, or provide evidence that Dalka was the fastest ever? Because to me, I'm doubtful about it because he was not a big man, and it just seems improbable. But I'd be interested to hear what his evidence was for this.
Yeah, it's all anecdotal. One of the problems is we don't have any film of Dalkowski, remarkably, or if there is some, it's in somebody's attic somewhere. But this was, late 50s, early 60s. Things did not get filmed and kept the way we have it today. So, and there was no adequate way to measure the. By the time the radar gun came out, Dalkowski was retiring, but it's mainly anecdotal. You have pictures like Sam McDowell saying this guy was definitely faster than I was. People saying, yeah, I saw Nolan Ryan and Dalkowski was faster. So you're right to question it, but it was universal. Nobody seemed to disagree with that assessment.
Barry, I seem to recall a story, and I can't remember if it was Dalkowski. I seem to think it was, and maybe it's in the book. I've got the book, just haven't started it yet. But wasn't there a story that they tried to time him, and he had to throw into a device, some sort of a frame that the ball had to pass through to be clocked?
Yeah, at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, it was a device used to track missiles, and it registered his speed at something like 86 miles per hour.
But the story, if I remember right, and correct me if I'm wrong, Barry, that he couldn't get the ball into that square for the longest time, and by the time he finally got it in there, he'd been throwing for quite some time and was fatigued.
Okay, I think we may have Brian. Are you back with us? Are you here, Brian? Because he'll be able to answer that question. It is covered in the book. Brian,
Anybody
you there? Yeah, Brian, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Well, I'm so sorry, everybody. For whatever it is that I might do well, I am a technological dinosaur, and I don't know what occurred there on things. Barry, let me just double check with you because we're now 2 minutes past the end time.
You just go ahead and talk.
This? Okay.
You just do say what you have to say. We want to hear it.
Fair enough. And thanks, everybody. Today, I'd like to take a look at 6 different components that went into creating Dalco, the untold story of baseball's fastest pitcher. First thing is we're going to take a look at, after a brief introduction, is Dalkowski is probably the last great American sports legend that has never been spoken about or spoken to. He's also someone who never had the human story told about him. He had been objectified, the myths had grown larger than the character, and that's what people want to talk about. Third thing is we did separate fact from fiction. At one point in time, there were 13 different Ted Williams stories that were extant on the horizon of Dalkowski facing him in some place in spring training. We've moved closer to substantiating why we consider Dalkowski to be the fastest ever. Fifth, we're going to look at control problems. Dalkowski's problems all resided between his ears. I've been teaching mental skills for over 30 years, and I know exactly what would have needed to be done to help Steve Dalkowski moving forward. The final thing is that looking at something that did not ever have the publicity that many great sports legends have, a Mickey Mantle, a DiMaggio, a Koufax, it's easy to access information about these people, but not so easy about a minor leaguer, a career minor leaguer like Dalco. So we have established an ongoing forum at dalcobook.com where we continue to get new information every single day about people who saw Dalkowski throw. First of all, I want to run through a few things that help exemplify what this character was really like. The ball came out of his hand differently than anyone else's. He didn't just dominate hitters or games, he dominated the ball. He could make it do things, rise, break, sing. God only made one of him. His fastball velocity remains unknowable. Every pitch came over the top. Your eyes couldn't tell your brain to react in time. 15 feet from home plate, it got an afterburner in its ass. I saw a hard thrower and nobody's ball did what his did. Lift is created by backspin. Physicists insist that the hop on a fastball is an optical illusion. As Jim Bunning and Sam McDowell said, physics is full of shit. Whenever he appeared on the field, everything stopped. Everyone looked. Everyone. With other pitchers, I'd work inside, outside, up and down. With him, we were only working to get it over the plate. He was totally inconsistent and brilliant. A radio ball is what old timers called it. You could hear it, but you can't see it. A hitter down 0-2 looks at the catcher and says, "What the hell was that?" He was easy hard. No matter how hard he threw, the ball was light. His wildness was an indispensable part of his myth. Had he been handled better, he would have emerged differently. He has an extraordinary talent with 2 devastating pitches. The word was he struck out 7 batters in a row, walked the next 10, and then hit a lady in the stands. It was a mental problem. His reputation became a self-fulfilling prophecy. He didn't believe that he could throw strikes. So many people said it, he believed it. The reputation followed him, and umps went along with it. They squeezed him. 7 years into his career, he was still called a potentially great moundsman. Now, for those of you who followed left-handed pitchers that emerged in the 1950s, there were 2 other absolute greats that showed up in the 50s. Start with Herb Score, and then Sandy Koufax. Those things that I have just read to you are items that were identified with Koufax and with Score as they move forward. It's a fascinating way to look at a pitcher who emerged at one point in time. It became perhaps the greatest left-handed pitcher of all time, maybe the greatest pitcher of all time in Koufax. Another guy, Steve Dalkowski, who had a lethal fastball, something that could really bring your sock colors to change, was somebody who was never out of the legend category. And Herb Score had his career taken from him by that line drive McDougal hit at him in 1957. First thing I want to talk to today is a little bit about the last great American sports legend. Truthfully, what Dalco did is the journey of the hero. Departure, fulfillment, and return. And why are there so many stories about the hero? Well, because they're worth writing about. The hero has found or achieved or done something beyond the normal range of achievement and experience. He has given his life to something bigger than himself or other than himself. And only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go. Without heroes, we're all plain people, and we don't know how far we can go. No one can build you the bridge on which you and only you must cross the river of life. Steve Dalkowski faced all of what the hero has to go through to try and find his way to the other side. What he couldn't do was look introspectively at the situation he faced and find the answers that only he could find in becoming the pitcher that he was capable of being. We conveyed the human story of Steve Dalkowski. As I said, there were 13 different versions of the Ted Williams stories, and when Steve had faced Ted Williams. We really conclude at this point in time that this was a fabrication of a journalist, a prominent journalist, who came up with this story and was good reading, never realizing that he might one day be held accountable for that particular story. There are two other versions that hold true. One was advanced by Ernie Harwell in his book. Talks about Ted Williams saying that Dalkowski was the fastest he ever faced, period. He never wanted to face him again. And then the scout Yaus for the Orioles also came through and was able to corroborate that he knows that this story did exist. But there's no way to substantiate it. It's uncommon for Ted Williams to not be on the front page of the sports section. And if he faced some guy that blew him away, then it would have been something that someone would have reported. In a couple of conversations that I have had during my career with Ted Williams before he passed away, he used to brag about reading the commissioner's name on the ball coming in. He used to brag about the fact that he could count the stitches on the ball as it was coming in. So if he did indeed face Steve Dalkowski, and Dalkowski threw 3 aspirins right by him, I'm confident that he would have remembered it and he would have been able to articulate it. We researched Steve's story and shared the good, the bad, and the ugly. The journey that Steve Dalkowski takes is about baseball, but it certainly is about beyond. In the past, people had only been interested in Steve Dalkowski for the stories, how he ripped somebody's ear off his head, how he broke an umpire's mask in 6 places and knocked the umpire out. Steve was a player. He was a human being who was loved by everybody. Every teammate that I talked to, every coach and every friend, and that's hundreds of people. I never came across an individual who didn't deeply care about Steve and pray for his success and a different outcome. His teammates and friends have, to an nth degree, said they appreciate the approach because it puts Steve in the best possible light. We had to distill the truth from the myths, the lies, and the exaggerations that were extant in all of the Steve Dalkowski legend and myth that was out there. It is the unknowable that keeps us interested in life, but we did want to find out if we could find truth on the stories and those kinds of things that happened. We know of a story in 1957 where Dalkowski hit a hitter by the name of Bob Beavers in the head, and the story morphed into having taken the hitter's ear completely off his head. It landed on home plate in a big mess. He made a final exclamation about "that is my ear," and then dropped to the ground and went to the hospital. When all of these stories began to morph, our imaginations began to fill in all the gaps. Now, the stories were intriguing. As a pitching coach, I used to keep these stories alive and talk to all of my pitchers, whether they were MLB All-Stars or Cy Young Award winners or first-time kids coming in to learn how to throw a baseball and do it correctly without hurting themselves. But I, too, was spreading the rumors because I didn't have the facts. I first came across Steve Dalkowski when I was a 9-year-old Little Leaguer playing in the major leagues of Little League. I had heard about some dude throwing octane up in Stockton, California. And like all baseball players in their youth, of course, I knew the 16 teams. I knew every player, every position, their batting average, and the manner in which they held the bat when they went to the plate, how they fielded the ball, how they threw it, because every kid in the neighborhood had to know these things to be able to play the game. I wasn't sure, however, about Stockton baseball. I didn't really know about minor league baseball. In July of 1960, my father's reading Time magazine, which doesn't cover a lot of sports, and there's an article on Steve Dalkowski. My dad comes to me and he says, "Brian, is this the guy that you've been talking about?" And since 1960, I've been collecting information, putting together those thoughts that exist about Steve Dalkowski in hopes that one day we'd produce a book that talked to the story of Steve. And that's what we have done in this particular situation. Fourth thing I'd like to talk to a little bit here is we have in fact moved closer to determining the accuracy of him being the fastest ever. As I heard Barry saying, as I was trying to figure out why it was I was not on the screen, much of the evidence is anecdotal. Anybody who has been around the game and been with those kinds of guys that can bring it at 97 miles an hour and up has a perspective that's very different than those who don't. Certainly we have the scientists out there who can give you one particular perspective, but I can tell you when a pitcher's arm speed comes through, I can stand with my back to home plate next to a hitter, next to the pitcher, and be able to tell you that his mechanical process was absolutely perfect because the pitch of his arm went through more quickly and that sound of breaking the air was a higher pitch. I know what that sounds like. I've had the opportunity on a number of occasions to stand in against the guys who throw in that rarefied air at 97 miles an hour. There wasn't one fellow that we spoke to. We did speak to a couple of Hall of Famers, including Pat Gillick said, fast as ever, don't doubt it. Earl Weaver said, fast as ever, don't doubt it. We talked to everyone who ever saw Steve Dalkowski throw, and every single person said, fast as ever, he's number one. You guys can argue about 2 through 10. And on our website, when you go to dalcobook.com, there are 2 articles that we have written specifically to that. One is The Gods of Mount Olympus Build the Perfect Picture, and the second one is Unraveling Steve Dalkowski's 110-mile-an-hour fastball. I spent a fair bit of time with Glenn Fleissig down at ASMI, the American Sports Medical Institute, and proposed a theory to him on how this could be done, and that's articulated in these 2 articles, which are on the website, not fully articulated in the book, because it was harder to tell the story when you got technical about things. I got down there on a Sunday. I spoke with Fleissig for 2 days straight. I was dealing with 7 MIT PhDs, and they were talking to a guy who only had a master's in psychology and played the game of baseball. We didn't make a lot of movement in what was going on over the first 2 days, but on the 3rd day, they acquiesced and said, if all these things you are talking about, Brian, did in fact happen or could have happened, there is the possibility that this guy was in that rarefied air. Cal Ripken Sr., who caught Dalkowski for a couple of seasons, said he was easily 110 or better. Now, what would Ripken know? Well, he got a chance to see everybody, didn't he? He saw Koufax. He saw Ryan Duran. He saw Rex Barney. He saw Herb Score. He saw Nolan Ryan. He got a chance to see all these guys, and again, he put him in that rarefied air. So the anecdotal evidence that we're working off is threefold. One, I've been around the guys that throw gas. I have a pretty good idea of what that is about. Second thing is, there's not one person, including 100-mile-an-hour guys like Sam McDowell, who said the same thing. Brian, fastest pitcher, period. Faster than me by a long shot. And Sam has an ego if you've ever talked to him. He's proud of being in that 100-mile-an-hour club, as well he should be. But he did make that point. He was faster than me. Steve Barber made the same point. Bo Belinsky made the same point. Everyone who saw him and had an opportunity to articulate it, he's number one, and you can argue about 2 through 10 in any fashion that you want. What we did conclude was, in talking about establishing, substantiating the closer to being the fastest ever, was Dalkowski's movement toward home plate was perfect. He was in the right place at the right time. The manner in which he generated the energy through his body was impeccable, and the resulting mechanics were flawless. They had to have been for him to do what he did, period. He was cracking the whip. He was transferring from one segment to another and making sure that that transition was absolutely perfect. I heard someone else say, as I was trying to get involved in the audio here, that Dalkowski wasn't that big. You're absolutely right, he wasn't that big. Doing things flawlessly doesn't have to do with size. Anybody who stood in against Billy Wagner will tell you the same thing. Wagner was 5'10", an inch shorter than Dalko, though he did weigh a couple of pounds more than Dalko's 170. Billy Wagner could bring it. He was a triple-digit guy for anybody who doesn't know Billy Wagner's story. But if you want to look into greater detail on the specifics of why we still believe that he was the fastest ever, then please go to our website at dalcobook.com, because there are 2 articles that are on there. The fifth thing that I want to talk to is Steve Dalkowski's control problems. And as a pitching coach of 30 plus years, I have been dealing in mental skills longer than probably anybody out there. And before it became fashionable and before it became a degree. I was teaching the Hindu breathing techniques. I've been teaching Buddhist mantras. I have been teaching non-visual techniques to working on training schemes with pitchers to help them understand that visual acuity is not absolutely necessary in coming up with the answers to the issues that come with control problems. Anthony Hopkins, the great actor, once said, "For me, acting is not hard. I read a part until I know the text so well that I can be very relaxed. Then I get on with it." That's something that Steve needed to do, but he did not know how to do it. He simply went out and threw. Eisenhower once said, "In preparing for battle, I've always found plans are useless, but planning is indispensable." Steve never did that either. He never took that introspective journey, and he never had the guidance from anybody to help him take that journey. Now, fairly, I'm not impugning anyone. Please understand that. That's not my goal here. I remember as a little boy hearing that somebody in the neighborhood was going to a psychiatrist, and that immediately meant you were crazy, right? There was no gray area here. Well, they didn't have anybody to help on these kinds of issues that were extant that Steve was having difficulty with. Steve had 3 major emotional issues. He cared too much. He cared too much about the result and never understood what the process was, which is what I alluded to a moment ago. And he cared too much about what other people thought. He had to resolve these 3 issues if, in fact, he was going to find a way to really do the very best that he could do out there. Every person is 3 people, something that we talk to in the book as well. The person that people see, the person that you want to be, and the person that you know you are. Steve was, again, one-dimensional. He was the person that people saw. He never took the time to figure out whether he wanted to be something else or what that person is that you know you are. Now, Koufax said something similar about that in the book that Jane Levy wrote about him. At one point, he wasn't really sure if he wanted to be in baseball. Then he got a real job selling some junk between 1961 and 62, and he decided baseball looked a whole lot better than selling stuff door to door, and he made a recommitment. Now that's where Sandy Koufax made a separation between great arm, great potential, and really came about to be the finest pitcher that he could be. Steve was an extremely dedicated worker. We know that from everything he did in his life. But just doing stuff doesn't get it done. The question becomes whether or not he was working at the right things. Was he following the right leads? Did he have the right guidance? And we would suggest in the book that no, Steve didn't have any of those. Again, it's no one's fault in particular. That's not what we're trying to establish here. But Steve's problems were all in his mind. It needed to be distilled down for Steve Dalkowski. And that's not to say he was stupid or incapable. It's what needed to be done. When I work with a pitcher who can throw 95 or 98, teaching them a changeup is absolute hell. Why? Their ego is tied to the gas. And the answer to the gas is when you have a problem, throw harder. Strike them out. Blow it by them. Let's get the K. Don't let him hit it. These are all the wrong approaches to understanding how you take somebody off 100% on time, bat speed, and contact. For example, Was there anybody who wanted to get in and hit against Steve Dalkowski? There was nobody that I found in hundreds of interviews that said, you know, besides Christmas, the thing I want to do most is get in and hit against Dalko when he's bringing it. He jelly-legged everybody. Each hitter took Dalko's first heater and then checked his sock color. The advantage was Dalkowski, but he needed to know how to employ the advantage. It was like the story Casey told me one time about Duran coming in and throwing. The 8th warm-up pitch, if it was a right-handed hitter, was going to go right over the batter's box where that guy's head was going to be. Yogi was told to stay down and let it go to the backstop so that he had the hitter's attention coming in. And Duran didn't have real great control either. He had everybody's attention from the get-go and had a couple of great seasons at the end of the 50s. What if Steve Dalkowski had known to throw strike one? All right, we already know that 50% of all hitters don't swing at the first pitch. And with Dalkowski in there, everybody was jumpy about even getting into the box, let alone where it was. He could have thrown a lollipop in there and thrown strike one. He would have been pitching ahead. If he'd been able to throw strike one and pitch ahead, his career would have been totally different. Somebody could have articulated to him also, with the tools he takes to the mound and the fear that he generates in the hitter's head, he could have pitched a contact when he was behind in the count, and he should have focused on the next pitch. But all of these things were never conveyed to Dalkowski, and while we have a litany of things now that are available to us in a different format than they would have been in the 1950s, this was all common knowledge. 60% of all leadoff walks score. Everybody knew that it was bad news to walk the leadoff hitter. 40% of all walks score. All right, everybody's known that time-proven maxim everywhere as well. Hitters hit 231 after strike one. Throw it over the plate and you've got an advantage. They hit 283 when you throw ball one. On-base percentage when you're ahead in the count, 220 for hitters. Behind in the count after 3 pitches, it's 447. Now, all of this was not articulated numerically in the way that we have it today, but these were all time-proven maxims that every coach and every student of the game knew. We knew that back in the 1950s, period. And what if somebody had broken Dalko the news that hitters in the major leagues hit 067 on 00 curveballs? They would have been awarding people the Hank Gary Batting Award, period. That's 1 for 20. That's not for long in the major leagues when you go on that. Dalko had a great curveball. So if he had simply thrown strike one, his career would have been different. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Final stop for Dalko doing all of that is that he might well have been on his way to Cooperstown. But I say again, what happened to Steve, and it's so sad, it's so unfortunate, that on this journey, the final step could only be made by Steve. And he spent his entire life and career waiting for somebody to feed him the answers. And that's something that no one could do. He had to take that final step. He had to take responsibility, and he never took it, never was able to take it. That's the singular journey of life, not just baseball. And when Steve left baseball, his life, not just his career, really hit the skids and went downhill. Final thing that I want to speak to very briefly is that we have now created an ongoing forum so that as we gain additional information about Steve Dalkowski, we are going to continue to put it on the website. We are going to incorporate those things for the revised edition of the book as we go forward. And we're getting new information all the time. People hear about the book, they wondered what happened, they saw him pitch, they were in the minor leagues, they saw him in a particular occasion, they heard another story. This is wonderful stuff. And we remain hopeful that because now, having established an ongoing forum for motion pictures and getting additional stills, that we might still find something of Steve pitching. If I had that opportunity to look at motion pictures of Steve pitching, we'd have some absolute certainty of how it was that he might have been able to generate velocities as far up the totem pole as 110 to 120. Cal Ripken Sr. was absolutely certain that he threw 115. As my old friend Ken Kesey told me one time, the need for mystery is far greater than the need for the answer. And that's an intriguing thought when it comes to Dalkowski. The uncertainty is part of the irresistible legend that belongs to Steve Dalkowski. And that too is part of the hero's journey. Now I'll entertain any questions that you might have that I can answer related to Steve and the book.
There was a question about the Aberdeen Proving Ground instance.
The Aberdeen Proving Ground, and everybody can still hear me, Barry?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay. The Aberdeen Proving Ground was something that was dreamt up and adds to the mystery and the legend of Steve Dalkowski. He goes to a military site where absolutely everything was filmed start to finish the minute you came onto the base. You know, the only exception extant to that? Dalkowski going to the Aberdeen Proving Ground and pitching that day is the only thing they never recorded. Hard to believe. I mean, it's absolutely unfathomable. He went in there and threw 85.8. There were several rarefied numbers that came out 96, 98 miles an hour, but he threw 85.8 miles an hour on their gear. Two things may have happened in relation to that. One is that the gear was supposed to be rating the velocity of artillery shells, and it didn't give very good readings during the direct overhead sunlight, and that's when Steve was pitching. 5 years ago, I punched out the first 6 hitters at College of the Desert. I know that's not the New York Yankees, but at 65 years of age, I was touching 81 miles an hour. You can't tell me Steve Dalkowski in his prime was throwing 85 and giving it all he had. Something's wrong with those numbers. Maybe he was trying to be careful and just lay it in there to the catcher. I don't know. But something was wrong with the numbers, because he didn't ever throw that slowly. Even after he injured his arm in '63, he was still throwing in the low 90s by all of the people who saw him pitch both south of the border and the guys who were around him at that period of time. So it's a fascinating story that should have given us an answer. Once we got hold of the still photos of Dalco doing what he was doing, we should have been able to then gain access to the motion picture. You know, the other thing that goes hand in hand, and I don't mean to get too long-winded, Barry, but the Baltimore Orioles went to spring training every year and filmed every prospect. We have motion pictures of everybody. How come the biggest arm in the history of the game supposedly never got on motion pictures? That's unbelievable to me. Now, when the Orioles moved from Memorial to Camden Yards, it has been said, while they gave a lot of material to the Babe Ruth Museum in Baltimore, that they jettisoned a lot of stuff as well, and maybe there were some motion pictures of Dalco in there. We know that most people watching D-League games where Steve spent some time did not have Beaulieu movie cameras and weren't at ball games filming people, but I can't believe there's nobody out there. And again, if I had the motion pictures, I could break it down and speak to exactly what he was doing. Did he take the short inside route like Wagner? He might just very well have done that. That's possible. If we'd even been able to assemble a good compilation of still photographs, I could have come up with some theory on how he was doing what he was doing. But we never even found that. Photographs, still, and motion of Steve Dalkowski are very, very hard to come by.
Other questions, please.
Anything else?
I have a question. What is the fastest verified speeds using the technology we have today? I think it's like 103, 104. And to think that somebody could do it 10% better when he admittedly was small seems like a stretch. Also, if perfect mechanics can do it with all the training and advice like people like yourself are giving pitchers, wouldn't somebody who had greater physical characteristics be able to approach these kind of numbers?
Well, let's take the first part. The best thing that we have in the way of velocity at this point in time was established by Nolan Ryan back in 1974. And the data that came out of that is he threw over 100 miles an hour, 100.8. But that measurement was taken at home plate. So when the mathematicians extrapolated that back to point of release, he has still thrown the hardest verifiable pitch in the history of the game at 108.1. So, second part of your question, now what's the stretch? Well, we're looking at 2% to 5%, aren't we? Is that achievable? You're darn right it is. Darn right it is. We just don't know. It's conceivable that Steve Dalkowski really did something that was very different than anybody else. It's unlikely, but as Fleissig said to me in one of our meetings, what if this guy really did something that we've never even considered? Who knows? Who knows? We have so much conflicting information. We have guys like Harry the Cat Burkeen talking about the fact that Dalkowski didn't bring his backside through and Richards worked with him on that. That's simply not accurate. There's nobody that can throw 80 miles an hour if their back leg is stuck on the rubber. It's just not possible. So I think that the verification you're looking for there is a far slimmer margin than what you originally articulated, because 108 to 110 is a very modest achievement. And then to go up a little bit further than that is something else. Now, here's something else that came up, and I've been after this for years, and I don't know why I can't get somebody interested in getting it done. I talked to the head of the physics department at the University of Chicago, and I said, I want somebody, make it their PhD thesis, to come up with how fast do you have to throw a baseball to get it to rise? Okay? Interesting thought, because no one's ever come up with a number. All they've come up with is it can't rise. Physicists will tell you it cannot rise. It doesn't go up. It just doesn't sink as far as you thought it was going to. So it's a mind blip. That's from 32 frames a second in the mind versus tens of thousands of frames a second going on. I got a call not long ago from Caltech. They have developed a new camera that is now able to extrapolate 6 billion frames per second. We're going to get some new information out of that. I got you. There's something else that's happening here. But if we could get some verification from a source of authenticity saying that to throw a fastball, because a fastball will rise, there's no doubt about that. It's just how fast you have to throw it. He comes back and say it has to be thrown at least 751 miles an hour. Well, then we know Steve Dalkowski and Koufax's fastball did not rise. But if they come back and say 113, has to achieve at least 113, and you've got every player that I ever talked to, both on Koufax and on Dalkowski, saying their fastballs rose, we got another thing to look at, don't we? I hope that helped answer your question.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I don't have a question.
Anything else?
Yeah, I don't have a question. I'm Greg, but I was looking at his stats, and especially the number of wild pitches and hit batters. It's very interesting.
A phenomenal bit of information. He did have a real difficulty locating that white thing called home plate. It's also interesting that while he had a lot of wild pitches, and wild pitches are different than hit batsmen, obviously, almost everyone who ever saw Dalkowski throw said he was, just like Koufax, wild up and down over the strike zone. That's remedying only one mechanical piece in the equation of what mechanics are. That means he had a soft glove. That meant his glove was not firm and out front of him. It was sliding toward third base, and we would have gotten him into the strike zone. That's the only mechanical piece we had to work with. However, hit batsman means that your head's moving around as well. That is a different kind of a problem, but you're right. He had some marvelous numbers in those, and his wild pitches still hold a record in one league, but he did have difficulty locating home plate. Had he been able to focus on what was going on and get his nerves under control, I'm sure that he would have remedied that problem.
Yeah, his walks were 1,236 and his strikeouts were 1,324. So there's like 100 different.
Those are some marvelous numbers, aren't they?
Yeah. Another story, you were talking about Ryan Dern. I believe there was a catcher that was with the Yankees, and when Ryan Dern would come out, they both wore glasses. And after he threw his warm-up pitches, they would go out to talk to each other, take off their glasses to clean them, and they would walk right past each other. And the batter would look and say, uh-oh, catcher can't see, and the pitcher can't see. So I'm in trouble.
Well, it's a tremendous advantage, isn't it? I mean, that's all Steve had to understand, is nobody wanted to face him. Nobody thought that facing his lethal cheese was something that was going to be a lot of fun. And take the next step and say, he has a lot of trouble locating home plate. Nobody's digging in. He could have lollipopped one in there, and the guy would have said it would have been like Mickey Mantle looking out at McLean when McLean was trying to give him that final homer, and he tells Freehands I'm going to lay this thing in there for him. Hitters wouldn't have believed the next one was going to be a lollipop too. He could have been pitching in a lot of 0-2 counts and then let the gas go. Nobody would ever. He had a lot of people swinging the balls out of the strike zone because they wanted to get back to the dugout safely and in one piece.
Well, it was amazing. He never pitched an inning in Major League Baseball, spent his whole career in minor, and most of it with Baltimore. I'm surprised they didn't release him or get rid of him. They kept him so long.
That's explained in the book.
Good. I have a copy.
It's wonderful. I appreciate that. Thanks so much. Well, it's not unlike what the Dodgers said about Koufax. Koufax was also 7 years into his career, and Jane Levy puts the quote out, he was still a potentially great moundsman. Dalkowski in '63, that was his 7th year, and he had made the Orioles at that point in time when he injured his arm, and that was the end of the road for Steve. And it's a shame because he had gotten to the point where he was going to have a chance to pitch in the major leagues, and that's something he never got the chance to do.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's great. I enjoyed the book, and thank all of you for your patience in attending. And please let me know if you have research to present. And I know, Don, you have a new book out. Do you want to say something?
Yes, I do. I have a book about the Black Sox in 1920 called Double Plays and Double Crosses, the Black Sox in baseball in 1920. It really goes through the whole season and the other scandals that were in baseball, both in the majors and minors in 1920. That book is going to be published by Wellman and Littlefield, and the publication date is March 11th. If anybody's interested in getting a copy, I can get a discount through the publisher. So email me if you're interested, and can save a little money that way.
Thank you. Any
I
other
would
comments?
I would like to say thank you to Barry for all
You're welcome,
your
David.
effort in organizing this and giving all of us a very pleasant Saturday morning.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Okay,
Well done, Barry.
Have a good day. Hey, spring training games start tomorrow. Good stuff. All right. We'll see you all again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.